Once upon a time warp in deep space, the struggle between the nice and the rotten goes on. Spaceballs. Welcome back to Entertainment Rebooted and another episode of Cinema Revisited Mel Brooks, where we are watching through the vast majority of the films by legendary director Mel Brooks. And we talk about the good, the bad, the ugly, and the iconic. And then perhaps we get into a little bit of what a modern day equivalent to a Mel Brooks film of this style would be. I am joined, as per usual in this series, by my esteemed co-host, DJ. Say hi, DJ.
Hi.
So, DJ, today we watched 1987's Spaceballs, starring none other than Mel Brooks and a slew of amazing actors. Before we get into the good, the bad, the ugly, and the iconic, for those unfortunate souls who have yet to see Spaceballs, would you care to recap the plot for us, please?
Who hasn't seen Spaceballs?
Like I said, poor unfortunate souls.
Oh, those poor sad people.
Those poor sad saps, even sadder than us. And that is hard to do.
Ooh. Ugh. Spaceballs is a high fantasy science fiction parody of Star Wars and like properties. It actually parodies quite a bit of stuff besides that. I didn't realize as much until I saw it again as an adult. I think the last time I saw this film was I think I was a young teenager when I last saw this.
Are we talking physically or mentally?
Yes.
Okay, so if it was physically, then quite a while ago. Mentally, yesterday?
Yes to both. I didn't say just because I was a teenager, mind then doesn't mean I'm not now. That's just how it works.
The last time you watched this was when you were a teenage dirtbag baby?
Sure. I remembered most of it. There were some things I didn't remember, but I got most of it I did remember pretty well. But yes. So, this film, it is, what's actually kind of funny is it's a very, very stiff plot.
Yeah.
For a Mel Brooks film, because so many of his films are there's 1,000 things going on. This one's really easy to describe. There are two neighboring planets. One siphoned all of their atmosphere, and they want to steal it from their neighbors, and that's the plot of the movie. Everything that happens is just the shenanigans of them trying to catch the princess of that kingdom, and the hero trying to save her. That's it. That's the entire plot. Everything that happens in the movie is micro skits around that.
Yeah, pretty much.
That's it.
Yeah, the main drive of the movie is that the planet Spaceballs is trying to get the atmosphere of Planet Druidia, and the way they're doing that is leveraging the king through kidnapping the princess.
Otherwise, it does a lot of Star Trek, Star Wars style planet swapping, where it's just a different background, but it's just them dealing with stuff. They end up on a desert planet. They meet the great yogurt who teaches them magic, which is the Force.
The Schwartz.
And with a lot of good comedy, and they run into the final confrontation on the giant spaceship, and they blow it up, and then they marry in the end. That's it. That's the whole plot of the movie.
It is.
I'm not really gonna go that detailed into this one because it's pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
The glory in watching this film is the skits that are around the plot. It's a pretty solid plot. It's very simple. It's just, it drives the movie forward.
Well, it doesn't have to be complicated too. And I think that's part of the reason that this parody is so good is that Star Wars, if you really get down to it, is a very bare bones plot.
That's correct.
Princess captured by evil people. People have to go and rescue her so they can destroy the planet ending machine. Very bare bones.
It's a classic, medieval plot.
Yep.
Just done in space. It's very simple.
Yep. So that's the plot of Spaceballs. If you haven't seen Spaceballs, then you should not be here first. In fact, I'm surprised that you found us. If you haven't seen Spaceballs.
The funny thing is I gave the summary, and it doesn't give anything away from this film. I can sit here and summarize it pretty hardcore, and you still have to watch it. You'd still enjoy it because all of the entertainment in this film is in the comedy and the gaffes. That's where it's at. So.
Yeah, you really don't really care about the plot as much as you just every single scene has something iconic and hilarious about it.
It's like Blazing Saddles. It's a very simple film.
Yep.
So,
all right. So moving on then. Good, bad, ugly, and iconic. DJ, what would you say is good about this film? Not necessarily iconic, the thing that you would like sell the film with, but what's something that just like maybe it gets glossed over, but something that you just in general say is good.
My good is pretty much the statement I just made. What makes this film just good in general is it is a very simple plot for a comedy film, especially. But you mentioned it, Star Wars, like some of the biggest films of all time. The plot is very simple. Lord of the Rings, Star Wars. You have a task completed. It's very simple. There's some complex things that happen around that, but the main drive of the plot is very simple. That's what makes this film good. It's easy to follow the plot so you can focus on all the side stuff and not get distracted. If you make your film too complicated, you start going down these little rabbit holes of this fun stuff, but then you lose track of what's actually happening. And then when the plot comes back, you're lost. Every time the plot can disappear out of this film for like 20 minutes at a time, which it kind of does, but you're never lost from the plot because coming back to it isn't a maze. You're dropped right back where you left off and you don't miss anything.
Yeah.
It makes it easy to follow. It makes it easy to be entertaining. It makes it fun.
Yeah, it's very one track. So all the humor doesn't distract from it because it's very easy to get back onto the track, like back onto the plot.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. The simplicity is.
That's it. It's just the simplicity of it makes it golden.
Yeah.
I actually kind of wish more films would be simpler like this. When you try to make it too complicated, I get lost, even if I understand it, it's not as much fun when you get pulled out of the film.
Yeah, there's very few movies that actually benefit from being more complicated and complex. And I think that there is this drive in Hollywood where a lot of critics would complain if a film is, it's extremely tropey or it's too simple. So a lot of people are like, well, it's an art form and the art form has to be more complicated and there has to be a lot of little moving parts and the story has to be really deep and complex and all the characters have to have all these different things going on. But to be honest, with movies, simple, if you can do something very simple, it benefits overall.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with a simple film as long as it's done well. This movie is very bare bones simple. But the fact that it's done really well, it's one of the greatest comedies ever made, one of the greatest parodies ever made. Everybody that I know loves Spaceballs. That's part of the reason, too, that I'm like, if you haven't seen this, I'd be surprised, is because everybody's kind of seen Spaceballs.
Or you've heard of it, or you can quote like half of it. It's like,
or you've seen the clips.
Yeah.
It's everywhere. Yeah. So, yeah, simplicity, man. That is really good. For me, I would say the good is the special effects. I think that they get kind of glossed over just overall with the movie.
Yeah.
So they are very, very good, though. He could have gone extremely cheap. He could have gone extremely simple. He could have made it a joke, too, where they don't have almost any special effects. This movie has a lot of special effects. They use a lot of the same tricks and stuff that Star Wars did.
They used a lot of Lucasfilm tricks, which I actually wondered a little bit if maybe some of the Lucasfilm team was involved, because you can tell they pulled some of that, like, force perspective stuff, some of that things that they were known for.
Yeah. And also just even the smaller details, things that they didn't have to do that they went out of their way and did. Barf's ears move throughout the movie.
Yes, they do.
And it's on screen, on camera, and they're moving and they're changing with his mood. So it's one of those things where they didn't have to do it, but they did. So the special effects is good. It's not necessarily iconic, but it definitely, I think, deserves to be mentioned. It's just as good special effects as the majority of serious sci-fi movies at the time.
Actually, that to finish off that point, that actually goes back to what we talked about a lot, where Mel Brooks tends to pay homage to the films that he makes fun of. Doing the special effects like a Star Wars film really gives it that same kind of my greatest example previous would be Young Frankenstein, where they get like the black and white, the feel of the film. They get the like the castle, all the aspects that they do it really well to make it look like the original films, but still with the comedic twisting that he does to it. So he's definitely giving it its due while making fun of the film, which is exactly what he's known for with all of these films he's done.
Yeah.
Make fun of the source material, but give it a really good praise as you mock it.
Right. You're laughing with it, not at it.
Yes.
That's a lot of Mel Brooks's style. You're laughing with it, not at it.
And this nails that with the special effects is a great good for that. Yeah.
Okay, how about bad? What's bad about 1997?
So this funny enough, this one actually suffers a lot from the same problem that some of the middle ones did. Blazing Saddles and Young Frankenstein were like my favorites, and some of the ones in the middle got a little rough because of pacing issues and stuff. This one drives dangerously close to running into the pacing problems that History of the World Part 1 especially, and then High Anxiety run into, where some gags run on a little too long or don't quite fit well. The one with the cross-eyed joke one, it's funny, but it non sequitur is a little too far away. There's a couple of jokes and scenes like that where it crashes the pacing a little bit. So the movie's moving around really well, and then it goes kind of screeches a little bit, and then it's going. But on the tip side of that, there's really good ones, and that makes those worse. The ludicrous speed is a hilarious scene. And basically from that point on to the end of the movie, the dark helmet scenes, the Spaceball scenes just get better and better. But earlier on, some of the early jokes don't quite hit as well. Especially the helmet guys on the set. It's a little rough and tough at the very beginning.
Yeah, some of them. Yeah.
The best example I have is the very first one where the guy's like, "You told me to tell you when we were there. Well, we're there. Well, aren't you a Spaceball?" "Oh, thank you, sir." Like it's a little goofy, but it doesn't set the tone well for what you want. Later jokes do a much better job of landing. And I think part of that actually isn't the movie's fault entirely. I think it just takes, I'm starting to realize it just takes a little while to get into a Mel Brooks film in general. And you start to feel it really later. This one is just kind of like that. I mean, even Blazing Saddles started out real slow, and it just gets better and better and better and better. Young Frankenstein starts out a little slow. It's kind of a bad to these films, but it's one I've gotten used to, and I've come to kind of respect a little bit more. It's still jarring. I think I swear I remember Spaceballs starting up faster, and I was comparing earlier films to Spaceballs and Men in Tights especially, because those are the ones that I knew the best, and I'm starting to realize those also suffer from that same problem. So I guess it's just a thing. Maybe I'm just jaded.
We're irreparably broken.
I don't know. I'm sitting here like, this one starts kind of slow too and rough. Are they all like that? Are all films like that? Am I just used to like modern films way too much that start out with an action scene and get you into it right away? I have been broken by modern film.
Am I overly critical?
No.
All of the films suck.
No,
it's the movies.
It is the films that are wrong.
It's the films.
That's it for me. I drug that all a little long, but I'm just realizing now that, man, I might just be broken.
Irreparably.
Apparently.
Bad. I have a hard time with this one just because, I've grown up watching the movie. I've seen it so many times. There's obviously I'm going to have the rose tinted glasses. I'm going to have the nostalgia goggles.
If you don't have anything bad to say about it, you don't have to.
Well, I'm trying to think because you have to give the films fair shakes, and there are some things in it that aren't necessarily that great. It's just
I had to nitpick.
It's pretty nitpicky if you're going to really break through. This is one of my favorite Mel Brooks films, and it's a lot different even than History of the World Part 1.
Yes.
It doesn't suffer from a lot of the stuff that even History of the World Part 1 did.
The pacing in it is actually really good for most of it.
Yeah.
It's only at the beginning. It's a little slow to ramp up in the beginning, but it does not slow down for the rest of the film. Yeah. And we did just watch History of the World Part 1 right before this one, didn't we? Yeah. So that one had a roller coaster of slow, fast, slow, fast, slow, fast. This one is just consistent. And with the simpler plot, it's easier to follow and keep in with the jokes.
Well, and everything really moves toward the end very well.
Yeah, it's hard to pick at, man.
I don't think I can actually pick really like a bad, because I'm even going to have a hard time with an ugly, to be honest. Just this one, I do have nostalgia goggles on, very
Well,
much
that's
so.
fine. You don't have to hate on it.
Well, no, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying like, oh, then just it's absolute. And I'm not even saying like it's like a 10 out of 10 film. It's got its issues and stuff, but I'm having a hard time finding a bad. It might just be like I'm exhausted.
I don't know.
I'm tired.
I feel like if I watched this thing when it came out, I would give it a 10 out of 10 because it what issues it has are nitpicks. I feel like if you have to look for problems in a film, it's a perfect film. No film is going to be absolutely perfect. Every film is going to have some little issues. You could, if you wanted to be an absolute like monster of a person, you could pick any film to death if you really wanted to be that way. But if that's what it takes, then that's a good film.
All right, okay. Here's a bad then. Pizza the Hut. It's funny. It's a funny gag. A lot of it is just really funny, but I'm not gonna lie, man. He's disgusting. He's disgusting to look at, and I get that's part of the gag, but it is like he's on screen for a little bit too long.
Ate himself in the bit of his car.
No, like the jokes around him are great. It's Pizza the Hut. He'll come for you. You know, like all of that is really great. It's just maybe I think that they stay on him a little too long, and he is disgusting to look at. Like he's oozing
like pizza, cheese, and
he's
stuff.
He's oozing grease and milk.
Yeah.
It's not even cheese. It's
it's
like
it's
very
pretty
liquid.
It's pretty gross.
Yeah. So I would just say that's probably the bad. Just Pizza Hut is he's on screen a little too long for how disgusting he is. Okay, ugly. Other than Pizza the Hut, because he ugly.
Oh, glory. Okay, so the ugly one, this was the one I struggled with because the bad was actually kind of easy for me because I felt it at the beginning. But on this film, man, like our uglies have always been like, what is the thing that would make you not want to watch this film? It's not as politically incorrect as like Blazing Saddles and some of the other ones. There's some there.
It's not very offensive.
It's not as it's not nearly as offensive. It's not nearly as like raunchy as History World Part 1. Those kind of jokes are toned down. And they're funny. Like it hits a lot smoother. It's just hard to like.
It's also a more modern comedy film.
Yes.
Because even History of the World Part 1, it's 1982, History of the World Part 1, and this is 1987. So within 5 years, films have very much modernized, and it doesn't feel like a 70s comedy. It feels like a more 80s, 90s comedy. So
man, it's a tough. So I would say if I was going to pick out something that'd be like the one thing to be like, I don't know about this film, because I honestly think everyone should watch this because it's a good time. If I was gonna warn anyone, honestly, if you want to be a prude about it, like you could pick like some of the humor and stuff you might like. There's not really anything specific, other than there is one thing, and that is the driving force of the film. Now we talked about how the plot is like really simple, really straightforward. All the comedy around that is pretty good. I would say that that's actually part of the problem. The driving force is so simple that the more fantastical elements almost stand out. The Swartz thing and like the Force stuff thing, the Star Wars elements and some of the pieces that they do that come in almost feel a little grand for such a simple plot. The Star Wars universe was like a Death Star that can blow up entire planets and like an empire that rules the universe. This is literally, we're trying to steal our neighbor's air. The stakes are very, very low. And so they do these grand heights, but when you realize how low the stakes are, it's like, it doesn't have as grand a nurture. And that's again, I'm having a nitpick for this, but that would be the only ugly. The plot could still be simple in that work. I'm not knocking on the good of the simple. You could have kept it simple, but they could have upped the stakes a little bit. For Mel Brooks especially, like his other films that he's done, Blazing Saddles, the stakes were really high in Blazing Saddles. he was going to destroy an entire town and kill everybody in it just so he could have his railroad not go around a mountain. Like that. That is like
because he ran into quicksand, so he was just like, "Oh no, quicksand! I could go around this quicksand pile, or I could go through this small town of Rockridge."
Yeah, that has a decent sized population. Like that's a high like I'm willing to like destroy all these people's lives just so that I could go through. This now that yes, they were to suck the air off the planet, so that is a big deal, but it's like self-inflicted pain. I feel like they could have done something real fun with like upping the stakes, or that's really it. Because you can if you raise the stakes higher, you can raise the jokes higher with it. That's Blazing Saddles works so well because the stakes are so high that the jokes that they're making is he's trying to like keep this town in check. He's trying to save this town, and they don't want to be saved basically by him, and that's what makes it funny. In this one, it's over.
Yeah.
Before you really get to any stakes that feel like something's big enough. Well, not only that, when they actually do start sucking the air off the vacuum, you start feeling it, it immediately gets turned back and it goes back. That drove that plot home. The planet doesn't suffer for very long. They undo their evil work instantaneously.
That's within 5 seconds. Yeah.
Within 5 seconds. I know it's a comedy and everything, but in Star Wars, when they blow up Alderaan, you feel that like in your soul. They don't have to go quite that bad, but you could drive it a little further. Like have the ultimate battle while they're still sucking the air out of the planet. Like he's already turned the vacuum off. They've already stopped the villain. Now it's just...
Well, now they're making sure that they can't just turn it back on.
Well, yes, now they're finalizing out. But if they were fighting and all that stuff was happening and stuff while the vacuuming was still happening, that ups the stakes quite a bit, and you can get both the humor and the rush of like adrenaline at the same time.
Yeah.
The reason that hurts so bad is because the opposite scene of that, to that ugly, is that scene where they're in the prison and they're like there's high action, high stakes to get her out. That did that really well. Right before the end, there was a high stakes battle where they were on the run and it was high adrenaline but still funny. That moment actually climaxed, and then after the rest of the film, it's not as high stakes. It's actually a lower stakes the rest of the film.
I mean, it's hard to keep your stakes high after you've climaxed.
Oh, God.
You're absolutely right, DJ.
Oh,
as always,
it gets me.
Just
Oh gosh,
right on the money. You just
all right. What's your ugly? If you have one, that's gonna be a tough one. I know.
Actually, I do have an ugly. I would say that the ugly isn't necessarily like a bad thing, but if you do not like sci-fi movies, you won't like this movie.
That's actually a really good point. It is a point. It is sci-fi and like it's like purely what it is.
Yep. And the other thing too is that this film, to really appreciate a lot of this stuff, it's very similar to High Anxiety. In order to fully appreciate the movie and appreciate what it is,
that's a good
you kind of have to do a little bit of homework. Being nerds, I've seen enough of the sci-fi movies to be able to point out when there's fun little elements and things like that. One that I did not get until this viewing was actually at the diner. I understood the alien reference. I did not understand that the joke was that it was literally John Hurt, and he says "not again," because that's the scene that he's famous for in Alien. So it is a thing where I would just say, like, as a warning, if you don't like sci-fi movies, you're not going to like this one. If you don't know enough of these like classic sci-fi movies that even like are still kind of like, if you like nerd culture, if you like science fiction and things like that, everybody's going to watch them. Like, you're going to see Alien, you're going to see Star Wars, you're going to see a couple of the Star Trek things.
Yeah, there are a lot of references in here that High Anxiety was like that too. If you haven't watched a lot of these films, you're gonna miss the connection.
Yeah,
and they're not gonna hit as hard because this
you'll
comedy,
get the onesie twosies enough to be like, oh, that's clever, but you're not gonna get the full appreciation of like No, he actually watched all these movies.
Yes.
You can tell that he did. And it's a lot of tropes and things like that. A lot of things that he does are very specifically tropes for that type of sci-fi movie.
Yes.
And they were very popular in the 70s, and they were wrapping up in their popularity in the 80s.
Yep.
So I would just say, warning, if you don't like sci-fi movies, you're not going to like Spaceballs. And if you don't watch enough sci-fi movies, you're not going to get half of the references, so you're going to miss out on a little bit of the extra fun humor.
Yeah, that I agree with that. A good ugly for this is you have to do homework.
Yeah. Okay, how about iconic?
My iconic is actually the foil to your ugly. Because I thought of that as my iconic first, and I wish I kind of thought of it as ugly, because that's actually a good one. High anxiety was the same way.
I finally got to say my ugly without you already having said it. I may actually have 4 different points than you for once.
My iconic is the references in this one. Like you said, there's a lot of homework you kind of have to do to see it, but if you do, it's worth it. And it's not just, I mean, it's on its face, it's a Star Wars parody. It's very strongly a Star Wars parody. It's got the Force, it's got the lightsaber battles, it's got the dark helmet, which is Darth, it's got it obviously. Lone Star is a mix between Han Solo and Luke Skywalker. Barf is straight up a Chewie reference. Like, yes, like the droid, the princess, the earmuffs,
Yeah.
It's as on the nose as you can get, obviously. But what's not on the nose, this is much like High Anxiety, which on the nose, it was a parody of like Alfred Hitchcock films. There's a back end to that. There's Star Trek references. There was an alien reference. There's actually 2 alien references in it. There was a reference to 2 references to 2001: A Space Odyssey. There was a reference to Planet of the Apes. There was reference to golly, there were so many in there. There was another old Battlestar Galactica. There's a couple of Battlestar Galactica references from the original series run. I mean, you're talking.
He even makes the Temple of Doom reference.
They make a lot of pop culture references specifically, and they talk about it like this is like, like Earth culture is like a part of this universe in a very like matter of fact way, and they fly in a space Winnebago, which is just hilarious. But like they had a Lawrence of Arabia reference. Yep. Like, oh my gosh, it was there was a ton of them, and I'm only scratching the surface here. There were so many small ones too, and just like High Anxiety, out of all of them, is the one closest to this one when it comes to like little references that if you don't pay attention you'll miss. To other films, other properties, even books. There was a Stephen King reference in there. I mean, it was. I'd have to like go. I swear I'd have to like go look up like a list to like see the ones I missed too, because it was happening so quick. I can't even tell you every one off the top of my head, but that's just the ones I like just caught. That's iconic. That's Mel Brooks right there. Be able to fit like 1,000 references in a film with a fairly simple plot, make it entertaining and funny. And it just a blast to watch. That's amazing. He's a master at that.
Yeah. Okay, so for iconic, I would say that I think this is truly the first Mel Brooks movie that is actually timeless. And the reason that it is timeless is because it's the first Mel Brooks movie that hit into a culture, whether he knew it or not, that has a lot of longevity. And what I mean is that the references continue to remain fresh because he actually hit on a culture that values its history.
That's a good point.
So when he's talking about...
And they're still going. These are series that still exist.
There's still series that are relevant. They're still existing. But the thing is that, think about this. He does the spaghetti western thing. It becomes very dated, though, because spaghetti westerns got really out of style in the 1970s. So nowadays we don't really have as many of those, so we don't get as many of those references. But also there were so many thousand of them that, sure, it's kind of a culture. Like, I had a grandpa who was obsessed with westerns, but that's because that's what he grew up with. It was nostalgia for him. He couldn't have said any clear references from any of those movies because there were just so many, and they didn't have a lot of longevity. They were just fun, entertaining movies. Then you have even like the Universal monster movies. There's a lot of lore associated with Universal monster movies, but it's kind of a niche crowd. Horror fans are fanatics about horror movies, so they'll get all those references, but it's not a mainstream culture. Then you have with History of the World Part 1, sure, you have the history crowd and they get all the different history references, but specifically the introduction, they don't make history movies like that anymore. They don't make history documentaries like that anymore.
No.
And you also have a lot of these references where it's like, even whether or not, we really want to touch in on this, the way that history is handled today as compared to how it used to be handled is very, very different.
Yes.
So some of the humor that he gets off is hilarious if you just take history at face value.
Yeah.
However, common culture, the way that a lot of people want to approach history is through a modern lens. And they put all of culture through modern lenses and modern filters to where everything that they're doing is unacceptable, but for a different reason. It's not unacceptable because it's a human tragedy. It's unacceptable because of modern standards.
Yes.
So unfortunately, History of the World Part 1 becomes dated because even how we are viewing history has changed.
Right.
And so you hit into Spaceballs, and Spaceballs specifically is Star Wars nerds, Star Trek nerds, sci-fi nerds, nerd culture. And because nerd culture is filled with people who they're...
Well, and Star Wars is mainstream.
Well, it's main. So Star Wars is
continues to be like 40 years after it started, or 50 years now.
Well, right. So like everybody knows Star Wars. Everybody gets into Star Wars. But this is another thing too. It's a different kind of culture. Nerd culture is a living thing, and it's a shared thing. It's like Tolkien. Tolkien is timeless because you have Tolkien fans who read the books, watch the movies, and it'll have this longevity because the culture in and of itself is a culture of sharing. And
Harry Potter touches on that too.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so the sci-fi,
where it becomes a not even necessarily obsession. It becomes like a lifestyle. Like it's entertainment as a hobby as much as it is like entertainment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's a hobby, but it's also a hobby that's very easy to get kids into.
Yes.
And you can bond over it, and it becomes their hobby. So as a result, there's a longevity to this culture.
I think a lot of that is the imagination of it.
Yes.
You're talking like, you made a good point there. You talk about like spaghetti westerns. That is a specific historical period of time.
Yep.
Horror films play off a specific period of time.
Well, and
like
the other
Frankenstein
thing is that
doesn't
horror,
hit the same in modern time as it does then.
Well, right. And the other thing too is that even like horror culture is a very specific niche kind of group. It is one of those things where, for example, you, Pat, me, we all love films, but I'm the one that's more into the horror culture stuff than even you or Pat.
But all of us are into all that. Yeah.
Yeah, but we're all into the Star Wars, and we're all into cinema.
And I think
Yeah.
that's the sci-fi and fantasy especially get kind of like I don't know, they're very imaginative, and so they spark all that parts of your brain that makes you feel good when you like think of cool, crazy things outside. Spaghetti westerns, horror, those are all things that you can see inside of our own realm.
Mm-hmm.
Sci-fi and fantasy exist outside of that. Now they can contain elements of each other.
Right.
You can have sci-fi with horror. You can have
Alien
exactly. You have sci-fi with horror, but that's the thing. Like sci-fi, horror is a subgenre. Sci-fi is a genre.
Yeah.
Fantasy is a genre. To be fair, most of the horror films, like The Young Frankenstein, is a science fiction fantasy film, but it's a horror science fiction fantasy. That's what makes that different. The fantasy and sci-fi can contain elements of any of this stuff. What makes them unique is they contain things that we don't have. And the only difference that splits them is science fiction is technology we don't understand or have, and fantasy is mysticism and magic that we don't have. But both of them exist outside of our reach, which makes them fascinating, and it drives people to like learn about them.
Well, and the other thing too is that when it comes to sci-fi, it's specifically made to be out of this world kind of technological leaps and bounds and things like that. So even to this day, Star Wars was made in 1977. It could have been made yesterday, and it could have been made the exact same, and it's still a very solid film.
Well, look at things even that exist in the real world, like iRobot.
Right.
We're getting some of this technology we're getting close to, but it's still out of our reach.
But the thing is that film is going to take decades and decades, but eventually we will get to the point where that'll be kind of like an everyday occurrence.
Well, theoretically, theoretically,
right.
But
that's
so could Star Wars, but it's so far outside of your purview.
Yeah.
It's the same as history. The difference is history's way far back, but we can observe it. The future is unwritten, which means it could be anything, and that's what makes it so much fun.
Yeah. But I think that this movie is timeless, and it's going to continue to be relevant because it feels fresh even today, because it is just the culture that he tapped into was a culture that when we share, like if I had kids, what would I share with them? I would probably share Star Wars. I'd share some Star Trek. I'd share Alien, the first Alien movie.
Because
all of those movies came out before I was born, and they were shared with me.
Well, that's
because that's
you made the point. They're timeless.
They're
like
timeless.
You can watch them, and they'll always be relevant. Like they're the same way history is, but the difference is history like we learn about like as a history is this. I think someone put this to me once, like history is a study of what was, sci-fi is a dream of what could be. So is fantasy. The difference is fantasy is an unreality version of that. This film taps into both. And that's I think also why we have a fascination with medieval times, because that feels fantasy to us. Because it's so far removed from what we have. Medieval
it's hard to imagine that it's ever been like
medieval feels like fantasy. And most fantasy realms have a medieval feel to them because that feels alien.
Well, and also that's where storytelling really took off.
Yeah.
Like a lot of early fairy tales and legends and stuff, like the Grimm fairy tales, it's in the medieval Europe.
Yeah. And that's the difference. Like fantasy is like, we treat fantasy like history with magic.
Yeah.
We treat sci-fi as the future with technology. And they do mix and they touch other genres and things like that. But that magical, like these are so far removed. Westerns, I think, aren't far enough removed from us. They still feel like something modern. Even something like Frankenstein still feels almost something modern. Whereas like a castle with knights and dragons seems so far removed from what we can have. It's mystical, and this film taps into all of that.
Yeah. So that would be my iconic. So we got into the good, the bad, the ugly, and the iconic. Okay, let's say that. What would be a modern day equivalent to Spaceballs? Like, what kind of movie do you think would be made today if you made something with the spirit of Spaceballs?
This is the hardest one because you made the point.
It's timeless. And
it's timeless. It's relevant.
Yeah.
Star Wars. We talked about this. Star Wars is still happening. Star Trek is still happening. Lord of the Rings is still happening. Harry Potter is still happening. Alien is still happening. Half the references in this movie still exist. If somebody watched this movie came out this year, 90% of the references would be current. Indiana Jones film came out last year. An Alien movie came out last year. A Star Wars movie came out a couple of years ago.
Well, the most recent season of something from Star Wars was like a month ago.
Yeah, I actually just watched Skeleton Crew. Yeah, like these are so much of the references in the movie are still very current. That makes it tougher. You're like, you could make this movie today and it would still be absolutely relevant because all this stuff still exists. The only thing I can think of is the one thing that Mel Brooks actually never really did a pure of. The one we're going to do next, Rubber Men in Tights. That might be too late, but Rubber Men in Tights gets pretty close. I mentioned how medieval feels like fantasy. Rubber Men in Tights feels like a fantasy film.
Yeah, it is.
It really is. It's a medieval film, but it's more fantasy than it is a historical film. It feels like fantasy. That's what it's designed to be. Epic, you know, an old epic.
It's a classic medieval epic.
Yes.
That's what it's supposed to
But
be.
if I were to pick something to do the Spaceballs treatment, it would be a true fantasy film. Take something like Lord of the Rings or you know, a Stardust would be a good one. Actually, it's kind of like a fantasy, good fantasy. Shoot, what was the other one? Yeah, do like Lord of the Rings and do like a Stardust reference. Do a reference like Aragon, you know, stuff like that. You know, Ice and Fire. You know.
Well, on the realm of that, you could do a dragon movie.
Yeah.
Because dragons are really big right now. You know, you have your Game of Thrones. You have a lot of different books and things coming out with that. And then you have House of Dragons. Again, that's Game of Thrones. But Curses...
Dragons come and go. Well, okay. I can give an example.
Dragons are kind of timeless. It's just that they do come in and out of popularity.
Yes, but they are fantasy in general. Like, but the funny thing is this is movies kind of did this, some not on purpose. Neverending Story 3 is a comedic nightmare of a film. It's funny because it's bad as much that it's actually funny. It's a pretty rough film, but it does have some comedy elements to it. It kind of touches close to what I would think of. I mean, where all these fantasy creatures come into the real world and just cause havoc. You know, that's funny, but it was kind of a poorly made attempt at that. Take something like that and go all the way with it. Take like Dragonheart is a good example of this. Dragonheart has some really strong comedic elements where like the dragon and the main character are like arguing with each other over stuff, and it's kind of funny, but it's not a comedy. It's an action film with some comedic elements. There's been films in fantasy that touch on the comedy without going all the way in. Earthsea, which was a poor adaptation, but that's not the point. There were some good comedic elements in that film, in that miniseries. Just flip it where those comedic elements are like a major part of the film. My best example is I can't remember the name of the series. The fantasy nerds are going to destroy me, but it's the one where the world is on a turtle with 4 elephants and there's a flat earth sitting on top of it. There's a whole series of wizard books about it. That one has a lot of funny stuff. Like the whole main plot of the first book is they're trying to determine the sex of the turtle that carries the earth on its back. And so they take this line, they sling it down to go check the sex of the turtle. And they get like whapped around flinging in space trying to figure this out. And it's hilarious. And the books are good, but the I think it was an independent film, but it was really funny. That's great. That is actually a comic series that makes fun of. It is a the book itself is satire, satirizes like Princess Bride is straight up comedy. It's the book is satire. The film is a comedy. It's like that's the kind of stuff that I would love to see done. And Princess Bride actually probably did one of the better jobs of it. But I'm thinking like high fantasy, dragons, all that kind of stuff. But freaking just make fun of it. Have a dragon that's like, because dragon's like treasure, and he's like sitting there as an accountant, and he's like sitting there like counting his money like Scrooge, you know, just silly stuff. The kind of stuff Brooks does, but with high fantasy. That's what I would love to do. I gave a lot of examples. It's hard for me to describe a film. I don't want to like spend an hour like summarizing it, but all the films I mentioned, those are the kind of inspirations I would take from. that kind of almost did what I wanted, but not quite.
Yeah. Modern day, an easy out would just be make Spaceballs 2, The Quest for More Money, because it's the joke because of how long it has been, and because the fact that they have made the sequels trilogy and they continue to make the TV series and they continue to threaten to make another trilogy of movies. It is the quest for more money.
It actually,
and the fact that it's now owned by Disney is there's so much that you can do with that. And also sci-fi, you know, you've had a lot of different movies that came out with sci-fi. The new Dune movies. Obviously they had Dune movies, but I think they were coming out in the 80s.
The first series came out in the 80s, and then there was in the 90s there was the mini series.
Okay, so the 90s was when it got really popular again. So now you can have more, you can do more Dune references, you can do a lot of different even like The Creator. It didn't do very well, but you can kind of make fun of that, where it's just like creative Vietnam, kind of like sci-fi Vietnam.
There's been well, and when this film came out, there weren't a ton of big budget sci-fi movies. Star Wars made Star Trek, kind of brought Star Trek back, but it came back in film form. This was like the special effects were rough, but you started after Star Wars. You had Star Trek got a reemergence. You had Battlestar Galactica. You had all these other like deep shows that started coming out, and then later on you got Andromeda. You got what is that one? Babylon 5. You know, all these like copycats are popping up. They were solid on their own right, but that came out, there's so many things you could touch.
Well, right, and that's the thing too, is like there's a lot more references, there's a lot more humor and things like that you can get a hold of. But it all you really have to do is make a sequel to Spaceballs where Lone Star is a depressed old divorcee, because that's all Disney does. That's all Lucasfilm does anymore, is make your main character, your hero, a miserable hermity divorcee.
Yeah, that's true.
All you have to do.
That's true.
So you just make fun of that, where he literally starts the movie like that, or it seems like he starts the movie like that, and it's like, after like 50 years, am I really going to do that to you? No, of course not.
They did it with Indiana Jones too.
Well, because it's Lucasfilm, it's Kathleen Kennedy. She's got something on George, man. She has something on George. And her mission in life is to destroy his legacy without outright saying what she has on George because he paid her off. That's my theory. That's
all right. Tinfoil hat off.
Tinfoil hat, off. But
I mean, I agree with you, but
I'm sure there's a lot of people. Like, there might actually be somebody, like one of the like 13 people YouTube lets watch this video. There's probably one of them that finally clicks and they're just like, oh my God, the birds are fake.
They're saying like, the birds are real. Birds are real. The CIA is coming to get me.
Kathleen Kennedy. But so the Spaceballs 2, that would actually be really relevant. But I think that
I honestly I agree with you. Spaceballs 2, the fact that them doing it after so long would almost be as much the joke itself.
Well, and the fact that Mel Brooks being he's what, 90?
Yeah, he's old.
92, or is he like 98? He's a World War II vet.
He's old.
So if he made the movie, it's even more funny if he shows up in it to do the merchandising, because it's like, why are you doing this? You're like 98 years old, and it's just like, because money never dies. I'll become one with the money.
They can make a joke like, you can't take it with you. It's like,
I can certainly try.
That would be a good joke in that.
Spaceballs the casket.
Spaceballs the casket.
But it's just
that's hilarious.
Like
Spaceballs casket.
But that's all you really have to do, is you just make a sequel to Spaceballs, because at this point, I think that the timing, the comedic timing, is perfect. for a Spaceballs.
Well, he redid Blazing Saddles in animation form. Something they could do is do another.
He did History of the World Part 2 like 2 years ago.
Yeah,
3 years ago.
do Spaceballs 2 in like a different medium, like you did with Blazing Saddles remake, or just remake Spaceballs in animation, or like in Legos.
Just make it live action, because the thing is that at this point all the actors are old. So that's part of the funny part, is it's literally like we literally dragged this dude out of retirement.
He'll never quit.
Yeah. But that's, I'm sure that probably won't happen, but I think that it would be funny to do. If I was able to, if I had the comedic genius of Mel Brooks, I'd probably make a Spaceballs 2: The Quest for More Money.
That'd be a good one.
Yeah. Anyway, speaking of good things, we're hoping that this channel is good. If you think it's good, if you like these videos, be sure to like them. We do really appreciate your guys' feedback and things. So if you have suggestions, if you have feedback for us, please leave that in the comments below. Otherwise, what did you think about Spaceballs 1987? What do you think about this, Mel Brooks series? And we're starting to wrap up and get close to the end. We have some ideas on where we want to go after this, but if you have any ideas for a series that you would like to see, we're always open to suggestions. Otherwise, if you like these videos and you're not subscribed yet, which would be, the vast majority of the world at this point, except for our small tribe of 57. Be sure to subscribe and share us with your friends, as YouTube will do everything possible not to let us be seen. So you sharing us with your friends is like our only way of actually reaching other people. So, speaking of reaching other people, DJ, do you have any final thoughts?
Nope. Watch Spaceballs or else.
Anyway, we'll see you guys.